I just want to say, I don't ever get emotional reading these stories, but I could not finish this story without pausing it at least 7 times, fighting back tears. I'm not kidding at all. You be the judge. Trigger warning, there is death involved in this story. The title is, You Can Come Over Again When You Bring My Daughter. This happened 12 years ago, 2 months and 13 days on a Wednesday, November 2nd, 2005. My DH got married in 2002, and we had our son 10 months later in the same year. In May 2004, we welcomed our twin girls. My family was beautiful. Every time I took a picture of us, we looked like families in the stock photos you can Google for. My DH is an engineer, and I'm a college professor. We had a nice house in the city, our children were healthy and happy. We even had a golden retriever named Argo, as if we weren't the picture of a family that's happy as can be. I can no longer look at the pictures of us because it makes me too angry. When my twin girls were born, we had no issues in the hospital. They were born right on their due date, latched perfectly, and passed all their postnatal tests with stellar results. When we brought them home, however, we noticed that one of the girls, let's call her OD, since she was a whole 4.5 minutes older than her sister, was developing a rash. I had not really dealt with allergies in kids since my son did not have them, and neither did any child or adult in my family. I wasn't sure what it was. I thought that maybe she just had sensitive skin like me. I can't tolerate certain fabrics because I have dry skin, and I'll often break out in rashes if my skin decides that it doesn't like something. So, I stopped using fabric softener on all the clothes. I bought the nicest, most comfortable bedding and clothes. At one point, I even made her clothes myself in fear that maybe something in the manufacturing process was upsetting my precious OD. We went to the doctor several times, and they knew that she was having an allergic reaction to something. But every test came back negative and we could not figure out what it was. It took 3 more months to figure it out. During that time, her allergic reactions got more and more severe. At one point, she was the only baby in the history of the hospital who had to be kept in a clean room because she seemed to have a reaction the minute she left. When that happened, we began an elimination therapy that would rival the lifestyle of Buddhist monks. My husband and moved our son and YD in with his parents because, well, we need to eliminate everything from our routine to figure out what's causing the reaction in OD. We stopped using our soap, our shampoo, our deodorants, our laundry, and was before we even going on our diet. It took us 3 more months, but we figured it out. Our OD was allergic to coconut. The doctors told us that it was a particularly rare allergen, so it wasn't on any of the skin test panels they ran. When we found out what she was allergic to, we were relieved. So relieved. But in addition to feeling relieved, I delved in and bought a hysterical laughter. I laughed so hard I cried to this day. My dear husband tells me that he did not know if I was crying from relief or pure happiness. You see, I come from a culture that uses coconut almost religiously. It's in our cooking. We break a coconut open at religious events. It's used in almost all our sweets. It's in everything. The reason I was laughing was because of how much I hated one particular use for coconut. When I was a kid, pretty much up until I was in the 8th grade, my mother would put coconut oil in my hair all the time. It looked greasy as hell. I hated it. And once I was old enough to start doing my own hair, I never put that stuff in there again. I was laughing so hard because of course I had a daughter with a severe allergy to the one thing I hated my entire life. We had a lot of fun telling people about her allergy, and everyone laughed because they all knew about my hatred for coconut oil. We told my mother, well, she laughed as well. She made jokes about how my baby must have heard me talking about my hatred for coconut oil while she was still cooking inside me, and decided she needed to hate it too. We all had a good laugh and left it at that. Or so I thought. My mother and I have always had a contentious relationship at best. We get along well enough, but we disagreed vehemently on certain topics. She wanted a traditional daughter who would be religious, get her MRS degree, marry a man that she and my father picked out. Yeah, that's common where I'm from. Have 2 kids, a house in the suburbs near her, and to be a stay-at-home mom like her. Well, I'm not religious in the slightest. I got 2 undergrad degrees, went on to get a master's and a PhD. Did not get married until 27, which is late in my culture. And I married a man who was the polar opposite of what my parents wanted. As this wasn't enough, I was a working mom who did not need her to babysit since my husband and I made more than enough for a part-time nanny. Essentially, the best way I can summarize our relationship is by saying that she was very proud of me and loved to talk about my accomplishments. But I could always tell that she wished I was something else. We have a fair amount of, quote, safe topics that we can talk about, but I could never discuss anything too serious with her, such as politics or my career. Not because she'd get mad at me, but more so because she just was not interested. And I hated getting into conversations where I'm passionate about something, but the other person could care less. As far as raising my kids, my mother was a just yes 99% of the time. She was hands-off and respected all my decisions, even if she did not like them sometimes. Example, I chose not to raise my kids religiously, but I still took them to community events, so they could understand their roots, and my mother never pushed them to pray. The only thing she continually got on my case about was the coconut oil thing. You see, my girls has very texturized and curly hair. We don't really know where they got it from, considering my husband and I have pinned straight hair that won't even hold a paperclip in it without slipping. I loved it. It was a little on the rough side, and my mother always insisted that a little bit of oil would make the curls soft and more defined. I always said no. Sure, we could have used some different type of oil, but my girls were still so young, and the allergy process had made me terrified of incorporating new things into their routine. I made sure I explained why to my mom. She remembered that we'd gone through with OD and her allergy. She brought me food and clothes at the hospital more than a few times. She helped me move all of my furniture and clothes out of my house when I was eliminating every possible source of allergen. She taught me how to cook from scratch when I was eliminating certain foods from the kids' diet. She knew everything about OD's struggle. To this day, I cannot understand how she did what happened next. November 2nd, 2005. I was giving a midterm that day to my students, and I had to be at my research lab late that night. My dear husband was away at some conference, and our nanny was down with the flu, so she could not watch the kids that day. So I had my mom come take care of them. My son was almost 3 years old, and the girls were a year and a half. Overnight visits with my parents weren't exactly common, but they weren't unusual either. They'd always come back from these visits very happy and well taken care of, so I had no second thoughts about leaving them with my parents. They spoke to me on the phone after their lunch, and then, around 5 p.m., we video chatted. The kids were also happy and healthy. I got home around 10:30 p.m. that night and called my mom to see if the kids were up by any chance, so I could say goodnight. I missed the kids by 20 minutes. They'd already gone to bed. So I talked to my mom for a bit, but she's pretty early sleeper too, so we hung up and we all went to bed. I woke up around 5 a.m. the next morning to go pick up my husband from the airport. We were going to breakfast together and then go pick up the kids. I picked up dear husband and neither one of us were very hungry yet, so we thought it would be a nice treat to pick the kids up first and go have breakfast or brunch with my parents. We go to my parents' house around 7:45 in the morning. My parents weren't there. My son was at the neighbor's house. I ran outside with the neighbor as soon as he saw his daddy and I pull up. He was hysterical and crying, and I could not calm him down. My blood pressure was rising because now I'm thinking that something horrible happened to my parents. My neighbor tells me that she isn't sure what's happening, but there was an ambulance in my parents' house at 6 a.m. And my dad had run over and woken them up to see if they could watch my son for a few hours until he got back. Of course, they said yes. I'm calling my parents nonstop at this point. I'm getting frantic because I don't know what's happened. My son was still crying, but he was calmer. He still could not really explain to me what happened, though. I honestly don't remember the details of what happened next, but somehow we figured out that the ambulance was from X hospital nearby, and we broke several driving laws trying to get there. We got to the hospital, pulled into the emergency entrance that was for ambulances only, left the car, and bolted it inside. A few nurses took notice of us immediately and were asking us what was wrong. I was calmer than my dear husband at this point, so I explained that I did not know, but my twin girls and my parents were here somewhere. I'll never forget the look of that nurse's face. She knew exactly who I was in that moment, and she was about to cry. Another nurse took me and my dear husband to an empty room, asked us to calm down and listen to the doctor before we went to find my family. My mother had put coconut oil in both my daughter's hair when they were playing the previous day before bed. The girls loved it when my mom did their hair, so they asked their braids and Mom was doing it. She put coconut oil in both their hair because it would make them smoother. According to my son, OD starts to get a little dizzy and itchy when my mom was doing her hair, so my mom gave her some kids' Benadryl, which made her sleepy. Since it was close to bedtime anyways, the kids went to bed. Giving her Benadryl was something we did whenever she had a mild reaction, since it usually means she's accidentally come across coconut from a secondary source. We also showered her from head to toe immediately to erase any lingering traces. My mother simply gave her some Benadryl and kept the coconut oil in her hair, and put her to sleep. The Benadryl made her sleepy and unable to wake up or be conscious enough to wake her up and bother to cry. She vomited in her sleep and the rash spread all over. Her little body was swollen to twice the size. She had asphyxiated in her sleep. She died painfully and slowly in the early hours of the morning. My mother had found her when she went to check on the kids that morning around 7 a.m. She was already dead by then. My mother screamed, called for my dad, and that's why they've gone to the hospital. My dad hadn't known about the coconut oil until my mom explained that day. I've never seen my father so angry. He was still unable to look at my mother out of fury, or me out of shame. When I saw him at the hospital, they had rushed into the hospital hoping there was some way to save my OD, and get my YD checked out immediately since he thought she might have a mild allergy as well. I can't explain to you my emotions my dear husband and I felt. I remember seeing my little girl and just being in denial. There was no way she's gone. This had to be a horrible, horrible nightmare. The following days, the funeral, and explaining to my other kids what happened, are events I still can't talk about because it breaks me. My mother was investigated and was my entire family. I almost lost my kids to my country's version of CPS once because they thought my kids were in danger. My dear husband and I had to fight tooth and nail to show that uprooting them during this time would be the worst thing for them at this moment. My mother was never arrested. My father did leave her, though they're not officially divorced. The majority of my mother's family refused to speak to her, and the few that do speak to her only do on limited basis. She currently lives on her own in a small town, and every couple of months, I'll get a call from her telling me how sorry she is and how she just wasn't thinking. And can I please find a way to forgive her? She wants to come see me. The only thing I can ever say to her is this: you can come see me when you bring my daughter with you. It's been 13 years. 13 years. OS just got his license this year and YD's going to start high school. Both of them are healthy and they're turning into amazing adults. But neither one has been the same since OD passed away. OS is extremely protective of YS and doesn't allow anyone to breathe rudely in his presence. YS used to be so bubbly and such a talkative little child. She's so quiet now. When she does speak, it takes some effort to hear her because she's so quiet. She told me a few years ago that she knows she was only a baby when it happened. She feels incomplete all the time, like a part of her is missing. I don't know what to tell her. I just don't know what to say. If it weren't for my dear husband, I don't think I ever could have recovered from the loss of my daughter. We've helped each other out through this loss. It's taken over a decade of therapy to even get to this point. I don't know what I expect to get out of typing all this, but I've seen how much comfort this could bring. So hopefully I find some of the peace. I told you that was an emotional story. I wouldn't keep my opinion on it brief because it's so emotional. I'm only going to ask one thing from you guys. Drop in the comment section below what you would have done if you were in this position and you found out this tragic news. I hope each and every one of you have a great night. I love all of you, and like always, Mr. Reddito will be back tomorrow.